There are men who build empires and forget their children. Meyer Lansky was not one of them. This is not a comfortable
Don't you
thing to say
worry
about a
now.
man whose biography includes
I
4
know.
decades of
I'm
federal
here.
investigation, whose
Subject
financial
departed
architecture
residents at
funded criminal
1428 South
organizations
Maplewood
across multiple
Avenue met
continents,
though within 2
whose name
unidentified
appears in
Caucasian
the
males.
investigative files of 3 separate government agencies as one of the most significant organized crime figures in American history. It sits uneasily beside those facts. It does not cancel them. But it is true, and it is important, and it is perhaps the dimension of his life that the historical record has most consistently failed to examine with the attention it deserves. Paul Lansky was born in 1931, Meyer's first child with his first wife, Anne. The birth was difficult, and the outcome was not what the young parents had hoped for. Paul was born with cerebral palsy, a condition that, in 1931, carried social and medical implications that made it, in most families of that era, a source of private shame. The conventional response was institutional. Specialized facilities, professional management, the maintenance of a careful distance between parents and a child whose needs exceeded what ordinary domestic life could accommodate. Families were told, often by doctors and social workers, that this was the appropriate response, that it was, in fact, kindness. Lansky did not accept the conventional response. He was 29 years old, already deep inside the organizational landscape of American organized crime. He was not a man with abundant leisure time, and yet he was present for his son in ways that surprised everyone who knew him. By every account from people who knew the family, from neighbors, from journalists who interviewed people close to the situation, from the FBI surveillance reports that documented, almost accidentally, the texture of his domestic life while attempting to document his criminal activities. Lansky was genuinely present for Paul, not in the distracted, obligation-fulfilling way that powerful men sometimes manage family responsibilities while remaining essentially elsewhere. Present in the specific, attentive way that requires actually being there, actually paying attention, actually caring about what is happening in front of you rather than what is happening somewhere else. The cerebral palsy that Paul lived with affected his mobility significantly. He required assistance with many daily activities, specialized medical care, and the kind of ongoing attention that is, for families who provide it, simply part of the rhythm of life, what the surveillance reports captured, and what family, friends, and neighbors confirmed in later accounts, was that Meyer was consistently part of that rhythm. He drove Paul to medical appointments. He arranged for Paul to be moved to better facilities when better facilities became available. He spent time with his son in ways that had no operational dimension, no meeting being held, no information being exchanged, no criminal purpose being served, simply a father and his son spending time. This took different forms across the decades. When Paul was young, it was the ordinary texture of involvement, the visits, the conversations, the practical management of the care arrangements that Paul's condition required. When Paul was older, when the care had become more institutionalized and the relationship had settled into a longer-term pattern, it was still present, not forgotten, not delegated entirely, maintained. There is a specific detail in the surveillance record that, once encountered, is difficult to set aside. FBI agents assigned to watch Lansky, men who had spent years trying to build a criminal case against him, who approached their subject with the professional suspicion that their work required, noted in their surveillance logs the regularity of his visits to Paul, the time he spent with his son, the ordinary domestic quality of those interactions. These were not notes assembled in service of any prosecutorial purpose. They were simply part of the documentary record of a surveillance operation that captured everything about its subject, including the things that had nothing to do with crime. Reading those passages, flat, bureaucratic, written by men who were trying to catch a criminal and accidentally recorded a father, is an unusual experience. They do not editorialize. They simply describe, subject observed arriving at care facility, spending approximately 2 hours, departing. Subject observed in conversation with son. Subject observed assisting son with movement between locations. The language is surveillance language. The content is something else entirely. He could hide the money. He could obscure the offshore accounts. He could arrange for the shell corporations to be impossible to connect to his name. He could sit in front of a Senate committee for hours and give them nothing useful. He could walk past FBI surveillance cars for 40 years without acknowledging their existence. He could not hide the fact that he loved his son. He did not try to. The conventional narrative of organized crime figures and their families tends toward one of two poles. Either the criminal life and the domestic life are presented as entirely separate, the loving father who happens to also be a criminal, or the domestic life is presented as contaminated by the criminal, the family as collateral damage. Lansky's relationship with Paul fits neither framework. It was not compartmentalized in the sense of being kept separate from his identity. By all accounts, it was central to it, and Paul was never drawn into his father's activities, never used as cover for anything, never placed at risk by the associations his father maintained. Paul's life was simply his life. The particular, difficult, specific life of a man living with significant disability in the 20th century, supported by a father who had decided early and without apparent reservation that supporting him was what fathers did. The men around Lansky, the bosses and financial operators who constituted his professional world, were, most of them, fathers. Some were attentive by the standards of their time, but attentiveness of the kind that Lansky demonstrated with Paul, sustained, hands-on, present for the specific daily texture of a life that required significant support, was noticed as something that did not quite fit the expected profile of the man the federal government was pursuing. Perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the man who had spent his entire professional life ensuring that nothing about his visible life revealed anything significant about his actual life understood, at some level, that the most authentic thing about him, the thing that could not be strategized or managed or made invisible, was his relationship with his son. His second wife, Teddy, whom he married in 1948, was also a consistent presence in Paul's life. Not a distant figure, but a genuine participant in the project of care that Meyer had been running since 1931. In the final years of Lansky's life, when his own health was declining, the heart condition, the pacemaker, the physical diminishment that comes with serious age, Teddy's role in managing the arrangements became more significant. She was, by these accounts, a capable and caring partner in a domestic life that was more complicated than most and more ordinary than the public record of her husband's professional activities would suggest. The Miami Beach of Lansky's final years was not the Miami Beach of his operational prime. The city had changed. But the neighborhood around Collins Avenue, where he and Teddy lived in their modest apartment, retained something of the older texture. The smaller scale, the slower pace, the particular quality of a place where people of a certain age had settled into the rhythms of late life. The neighbors knew him in the way of such neighborhoods. Quiet, polite, regular in his habits, the husband walking his small terrier in the mornings. The FBI car across the street was a feature of the streetscape that the neighbors had long since stopped remarking on. What some of them did remark on, in later accounts, was the visits involving Paul. When Lansky went to be with Paul, or when arrangements were made for Paul to come, the quality of his attention visibly shifted. Something in his posture, something in the particularity of his focus. He was not performing fatherhood for an audience. He was simply being a father, which is a different thing, and which people who observe it carefully can generally distinguish from the performance. There is a particular quality to the aging of people who have spent their lives managing significant complexity. The world contracts, as it does for everyone who grows old, but the contraction is more dramatic. From an empire to an apartment, from international financial architecture to a morning walk with a small dog along Collins Avenue. What does not contract, or what contracts more slowly, is the web of relationships that have accumulated across decades, the people who were cared for and who continue to need caring for. Paul needed caring for. Long after the casinos were gone, long after the offshore accounts had become a matter of federal speculation rather than active management, long after the men who had depended on Lansky's financial systems were dead or imprisoned, Paul remained, and Lansky, in the diminished world of his final years, remained present. When Lansky died in January of 1983, Paul survived him. The care arrangements Lansky had made outlasted the man who made them, which was, presumably, the point. Whatever portion of the larger financial architecture was designated for Paul's ongoing support did not appear in the documented estate. The $57,000 that investigators found was not, in all likelihood, the complete picture of what had been arranged for his son's future. The historical record of Meyer Lansky is, primarily, a record of what he did professionally, This is understandable. It is also incomplete. The man who built all of that also drove his son to medical appointments. He also sat with him for hours in care facilities that smelled of institutional cleaning products and the particular quiet of places where time moves differently. He also worried in the specific way that parents of children with significant disabilities worry. Not abstractly about outcomes, but concretely about today, about tomorrow, about what happens when the person who has always arranged things is no longer there to arrange them. He arranged things. He kept arranging them through all of it until the end. And that, alongside everything else, is what Meyer Lansky was.